Of the 3 games in the Castle of Shikigami, or Shikigami no Shiro trilogy, it's probably number 2 I think that has the best reputation. And it's easy to see why. This is a really solid title that does a great job of combining its funny, charming, more accessible side with systems, patterns and gameplay depth that will appeal to the more hardcore crowd. And this Switch port, while on the pricey side, comes with a hefty amount of content, not least in its wealth of playable characters. There is a bit of jank both to the gameplay itself and the meta elements of this port, but in many ways that is almost the series' calling card, and it's nothing that ought to stop you from having an awesome time. Now, Castle of Shikigami 2 is a game that has appeared on numerous consoles down the years, and despite being a pretty well-respected shmup, arguably the thing it is most famous for is the bafflingly inept PS2 translation of its story and dialogue, along with some comically awful English voice acting. And unlike in most shmups, these story and dialogue sections were not just a few brief words during stage transitions, but extensive conversations between characters and bosses that changed depending who you selected, and even had variations for different combinations of characters if you were playing a mode that allowed you to select 2 at once. All the conversations are retained in this Switch version, however the translations have been redone to, if not entirely make sense, at least be mostly grammatically correct, with the English voice acting being removed entirely. And honestly, in my opinion, this was a bit of a waste of time. This new translation no doubt took a fair bit of time, effort and money, and, well, does anyone really care? I may be wrong, but I would be surprised if having an accurate translation of the dialogue would have led to even a single sale from someone who wasn't planning on picking up the game anyway. Personally, after briefly scanning a few of the dialogues during my first few runs, I quickly took advantage of the option to just have them turned off and focus on the gameplay, as without the mistake-riddled translations, they aren't even particularly amusing anymore. Fortunately, however, focus on the gameplay and what you find is a very competent and enjoyable shooter, with so much variation in the ways to play that you could easily sink dozens of hours into it and still have new approaches to start again with. The majority of this variety comes from the fact there are 7.5 very different characters to choose from, each of whom has their own unique shot and bomb, and a very unique secondary Shikigami attack, with each of these having 2 different variations. The shots mostly cover the standard range of wider and weaker, narrower, more powerful, homing, etc. But when talking about the range of the Shikigami attacks, the word standard does not apply. Just to give you a brief flavour, you might have a ghost form that auto-attacks incoming enemies, a 3-pronged rotating blade that extends from your body, or a bullet-absorbing cat/shield that, when fires, whatever it's soaked up back up the screen. All of these force you to approach the game in different ways, with many being suitable to different playstyles, to score versus survival, or even to particular bosses or set pieces. You're really going to want to experiment to see which ones suit you best, and even after you think you've made your choice, if you're anything like me, you're going to be going back to all the others and seeing how they impact different sections anyway. And to be honest, even after a good few hours of playing, I am still switching between at least 3 characters, unsure which one I prefer playing as most. Adding even further to this is the new Dramatic Change mode, which, when I read about it pre-release, seemed to be being sold mainly as a way for single players to play with 2 characters so as to see their dialogue interactions. However, my actual experience has been quite different, with this mode allowing you not just to select a second character, but switch to them with just the press of a button at any point during gameplay. With the aforementioned major changes to how each character allows you to approach the game, being able to have, for example, one character who's great for picking up points in stage, and one who's great for speed killing bosses, or one character who auto-attacks while you're focusing on micro-dodging through the more intense late game patterns, it all introduces a whole new layer of strategy to proceedings, and I found this mode to be a far more major addition than I was expecting. And the game offers a further sense of variety through the stages themselves, with some imaginative set pieces and boss fights. Although on paper there are just 5 stages, each is broken up into 2 distinct sections, with a stage end boss fight against a human character and an initial section end boss fight against some sort of machine or contraption. I have to be honest and say I personally really hate Stage 3-1, the most unique section, with its mazes of moving stage hazards, but in general the patterns and encounters keep the engagement level high throughout, with a nice mix of original bullet and attack patterns scattered through the more bread and butter bullet hell stuff. And make no mistake, this is a bullet hell, with a lot of relatively slow moving, screen filling patterns, especially during boss fights. One of the key characteristics of the patterns here is the use of big radiating neon curtains that are very easy to keep track of, with smaller yellow bullets floating about on less predictable courses. I did initially find these little yellow bullets frustrating, especially as they can blend in a bit with the coins enemies drop, but it doesn't take too long to get used to them. There are also some destructible bullets, but with these only being subject to one of your two shot types. One of the key things you're going to notice when navigating these patterns is your movement speed, and this is one of the things that can give the game a just very slightly janky feel, despite the fact I assume it is completely deliberate. Your regular movement is pretty speedy, but you can slow things down when using your Shikigami attack. However, unlike in say a cave game where you push that focus shot button and immediately reduce your speed, here there is a delay while your Shikigami appears, during which time you continue to move at regular speed. Like I said, this is an intentional feature, but for me it just feels a little rough and is probably the aspect of the game I found it most difficult to get used to. Due to the wide range of Shikigamis on offer, you may also find yourself in situations where you want to slow down to dodge patterns from the back of the screen, but your Shikigami attack only deals close range damage, leaving you in a bit of a quandary. This, however, is a far more positive consequence, as it forces you to strategize and mix up how you play, especially in the aforementioned dramatic change mode. Something else that will mix up how you play is the game's scoring system, which is based around a proximity status that encourages you to sit as close to enemy bullets as possible to raise up a multiplier. This multiplier can go as high as ×8, but proximity to bullets doesn't just affect your score, it also increases the power of your main shot, with its colour changing to red when near the max level. When using your Shikigami shot close to an enemy bullet, however, there is a further effect, with this seeing the coins enemies drop being sucked towards you, with coin values also being affected by your multiplier number. And these coins themselves, by the way, each increase in value for every one you collect during a stage, with maximising your score potential here adding several further different wrinkles to your character and shot choice that of course still has to be balanced with survival and the ability to take down bosses, with further stage end bonuses such as speed killing the boss also needing taken into account. It's basically just a great combination of simple systems that does a fantastic job of offering variation and complexity without ever becoming overcomplicated or overwhelming the player. Once you've settled on a character and Shikigami you are comfortable with, everything comes together very intuitively, and it's great fun running through the game both just to survive and looking for scoring exploits. And once you're comfortable with the arcade mode, there's even a new arrange mode that's been added, with this being an arrange in the most literal sense, seeing enemy and bullet patterns rearranged rather than introducing any new elements to play. The rearrangements can be pretty major though, with stage 3-1 displaying the most clear and obvious differences. The game also encourages you to properly take your time with it by not offering unlimited continues from the get-go, starting you off with a still relatively generous 3 and granting 1 more for each hour played until you do eventually hit a free play status, although most people will probably be making it to the end long before that. There's also a gallery with unlockable images, although most of these are tied to simple achievements such as playing with a certain character or viewing certain cutscenes. These little dialogue scenes can also be viewed at any time and with any combination of players after having been watched once in a little option that, to be honest, I personally took one look at and then basically ignored. The game does have a decent range of other options with an arranged soundtrack, easy and expert difficulty modes, and a solid enough stage select. It also has the 2 most oft requested features, online high scores and Tate mode. However, each of these does add a little of the series' trademark jank to their implementation. The Tate mode is basically fine, it works really well during gameplay, which is the most important thing. However, somewhat bizarrely, only about half the menu options stay rotated, and if you're playing in handheld, you're going to be flipping your switch back and forth if you want to make any control adjustments or view the gallery, for example. Minor stuff, but just a bit amateur feeling. It's the high scores, however, that end up being far more awkward. First, you have to re-download them every time you want to update your score, a process that the game says takes about 3 minutes each time. Once downloaded, the scores are nicely sorted by character and mode, but they will only display the top 50 scores, and that applies to your own score as well. Now, since the game is only just out, that was mostly okay for me as I could manage to get into that range, and indeed some of the less popular characters boards didn't even have 50 scores at the time of writing. But as the game gets into more people's hands, I'm sure that's going to get more and more difficult, and it's not really very interesting to see other people's scores if you don't know how your own compares. And you won't know because these are the only scoreboards the game has, meaning your own high scores aren't even displayed in a local board for you to try and best your own past efforts. all a bit weird, especially given that these would be excellent boards with the simple addition of the ability to view your own ranking regardless of how low it is. Presentation wise, I don't have a huge amount to say. Both in audio and visuals, this is about as mid as you can get. The character animations are good and the profiles used during dialogue add some personality to proceedings, but the backgrounds aren't much to write home about while still remaining nice enough. The first stage, set above Tokyo at night, is probably the best looking, but after that the game loses any real sense of place, with you just floating through increasingly abstract and seemingly unrelated locations. Enemies don't really change or match each stage either, and basically everything looks competent but unremarkable. I had similar feelings with the music. It too is fine. Most stages' opening theme does repeat after the mid-boss, something I think very few tracks outside Toaplan classics like Dogyun are capable of doing without becoming a bit annoying. But in general, it is serviceable, and as mentioned, there are 2 versions of the soundtrack to mix things up. So all in all, despite a few minor missteps here and there, this is another excellent addition to the Switch's shmup library. This has never been one that you see kicking around the greatest of all time lists, but it's also one that still gets almost all the big things right, and it feels like it's not a million miles away from clambering up onto a plinth alongside its more hallowed brethren. Despite its cleaned up translation, this new version still has a bit of jank to it, but in some ways that is the Castle of Shikigami charm. And overall, I have had a really great time playing the game, and I expect to be coming back for a long time, further exploring the different character options and going for higher scores. I give this new version an 8 out of 10, although I will add a proviso there that this is for those of you who know you are looking to get it on Switch. The same version is already available on Steam, and over there it's half the price. So if you don't have a strong preference for handheld play, or you have a Steam Deck, you're probably better off heading over to your PC. Personally, I picked up the physical copy from Japan, with that only costing about the same as the digital edition anyway, so I feel like that was pretty good value for money. However you choose to pick it up though, do let us know your thoughts below. And thanks as ever for watching. See you next time. Cheers.